the part of the mind that creates wants works independent of the part that actually gives a green light to act on the want.
Your brain's already got different wants. Like your brain does want to get the uni assignment done, but then it also wants to scroll Instagram.
But what I realized, there's a part of our mind built to keep us from growing and making progress.
And there'll be 100 different ways to get the happiness, but they don't move the needle forward.
There are things we can do that can help us move the needle forward. And one of the simplest things is
Hey guys, vertical intro from me today, and that's because the one I recorded previously I was not happy with. It doesn't convey just how good today's episode is going to be. If you're like me, you know that phase of life where you know what you need to be doing, the right steps to take, but you keep getting distracted, taking the wrong steps, not doing what you need to do to make that step forward, right? We all know what that place is like, and every day you wake up feeling like a failure. You've got a to-do list full of 10 things, you get none of it done, and you feel like of those 10 hours you're getting maybe 1 hour's worth of stuff done, and you're not getting output which you'd like to get. And Kam is a great mentor for this. He spent a decade, multiple decades, exploring this kind of hidden barrier in our mind, right? It feels like we're going against what we want to achieve. And he said that's exactly what it is. Inside our brain, we have a focus point, something inside it that literally forms a wall, a barrier, a resistance, something that makes us not want to take that correct step. And it might be something simple like that short dopamine, but it can also be something really complicated. Your mind plays loads of tricks, and there's so many places in this episode where I was thinking, whoa, I've gone through that trick, or whoa, maybe that's something on me, where I was getting tricked by my brain. There's loads of useful insights in today's episode, and I really invite you to come along with me to today's episode. Join me as we speak to Kam about the hidden barriers in your mind, how you can overcome them, and how you can stop feeling like you're letting yourself down and start taking the right steps to success.
It just opened my eyes to how deep and twisted your own brain works against you in some ways. Kam, thank you so much for coming on to the Starting Story podcast with me today. It's a pleasure to have you on. I'm super excited. In fact, I reached out to you first because I saw your story about this big problem that young people are facing, about almost that paralysis, even when you know what the right thing is to do. And seeing you really niche down on it and trying to help people, I was like, I need to have this person on my podcast, the perfect guest on. How are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic. I want to first off say thanks for having me. I'm really appreciative. And yes, this is a really great topic that I think people are really going to resonate with, especially considering they're probably struggling with it right now and haven't really come up with a good understanding or answer for it.
Exactly. I feel like for this topic, it's one of those things that people keep hidden. It's one of those things which is almost like a weakness in someone's character. They can see as a flaw, and they don't want to
Yeah.
reveal to the world that I have this deeper flaw, that I can't do something even though I want to.
Yeah.
But clearly, you're gonna show in this episode that it's not something that you're struggling alone. Lots of people struggle with it, and there are ways to get yourself out of the trap. There's no one size fits all, but there never is. And if there was a one size fits all, then of course it wouldn't kind of work as a coaching kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you're going to explain how you could potentially try and get yourself out of this trap, how you can start taking action on something you really always wanted to do, and really how it's not something to hide. And I like the fact that it's a very modern topic. It's
Yeah.
kind of, I've never, in all the guests I've interviewed, I've never had someone who's been so specific on a problem that's quite a big problem.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you're here today.
All right. Thank you very much. And if you want, I can just get started with my story. It'll kind of be a good segue.
Yeah,
to
sure. Let us know how you
understanding.
started in this journey.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just start off by saying my name is Kam Knight. I am a mentor, international speaker, and author of a dozen books that you see behind me. And now I talk about a concept called internal resistance. And it answers a question I had my whole life, which is, why is it if I want to do something, I know what to do, I know how to do it, and I have the motivation and desire to do it, but for one reason or another, I can't or don't do it. And the reason I came to this topic is because since I was young, I was a fairly driven individual. I did want to do more and have more in life. And although I've had my fair share of success, I felt like I missed the mark in a lot of ways, or the success was much more difficult and stressful than it needed to be. And I always wondered why that was. As I said, why is it if I want to do something and I know what to do, and I know how to do it, but for one reason or another, I can or don't. And at the time, there were no clear answers. The best answers I came up with, or that I was hearing, was related to beliefs. Either that you have limiting beliefs, or you need to have better beliefs, or things in line with motivation and discipline. And don't get me wrong, those are pieces of the puzzle, but I felt like there was a lot more to it. And over the last 15 to 20 years, more or less, that question always lingered in my mind. Every time I felt stuck, I wondered why. Why can't I get stuff done? Why do I keep spinning my wheels? Why don't I just do this thing so I can get the result that I want? And a lot of times when people, as you had mentioned, we kind of struggle with this, we start to assume that it's us, that we don't have what it takes, we're not good enough, we're lazy, and things of that nature. But what I realize, it's actually none of that. I realize there's a part of our brain designed to hold us back. There's a part of our mind built to keep us from growing and making progress. And I call this part resistance. And it's this brick wall that we hit anytime that we want to do something, but we can't, no matter how much we want to do it.
I see. What is that part of the mind then? How is it? Is it like a biological thing? Is it like a metaphorical thing? What is it?
Yeah, so to really understand resistance, it helps to understand that the part of the brain that creates wants and desires, it works separately from the part that allows us to act on that desire.
Okay.
So this is extremely important, so I'll say it one more time. The part of the mind that creates wants works independent of the part that actually gives a green light to act on the want. So we have one part of the mind that is creating wants, and in a way, it's cranking out wants one after another at a pace faster than anyone can achieve. And
Hmm.
so this part of the brain was never meant to check to see if a want that it's creating is achievable, fulfilling, safe,
Hmm.
or any of that. Its only job is to create wants. And like I said, in many ways, it's just kind of cranking out wants one after another. And so then we have another part of the brain that checks to see if the want is safe or that we have the time, energy, and resources to do. And so the way this works is anytime a desire or a decision stands before us, that desire or decision gets evaluated by this part of the brain using a whole host of criterias. And if the desire and decision is not in line with any of the criteria, it will prevent action.
Hmm.
So a good way of thinking about this is anytime a decision or a want stands before you, it gets evaluated by this part of the brain. And it's like standing before a panel of judges or board of directors. Every decision that comes up must go through them. And even if one of the members is against the idea, it won't pass. And what's really important to understand is it's possible for one person's brain to both create a want for something and at the same time keep us from going after it.
Hmm.
And I remember when I was struggling with this, I used to think whoever created us humans must have been really sick and twisted because how could they do this? How
Yeah.
could they create these strong desires in us and then keep us from going after it and dealing with the pain? But when you look at it from this perspective, it makes much more sense. And so, what's even more important to understand is both parts can get in our way. The parts that get create wants can get in our way, and so can the parts that allow us to act on that wants. And so, what's really important to understand is it doesn't matter how much motivation you have, how simple the solution is, or even how much benefit you can derive. And this
Hmm.
is where people struggle because they think, well, if I want this, I should be able to do it. And because I can't, there must be something wrong with me. But it's not that. It's that we have these two things going on. And if we don't understand what's going on, it's usually the reason that keeps us stuck. And many of us don't. And it took me a long journey to figure out, which is
Yeah.
why a lot of people experience this without having any sort of solution or um, um, any sort of way of getting through it.
Wow, that's as you were speaking, I was literally trying to understand it from my angle as well, from certain scenarios. For example, a lot of people my age will know the common problem of trying to get anything done. Like it could be university assignment, it could be
Yeah,
something related to your business, it could be something related to the podcast for me. And then you've got your phone next to you and you see that message come up from Instagram, you see a message come up from whatever social media you're using, and suddenly you realize you're scrolling on there. And
yeah,
it got me thinking that you said one part of your brain produces wants, right? So in that particular scenario, because I feel like it's quite relevant, your brain's already got different wants. Like your brain does want to get the uni assignment done because either it wants to, or ultimately your brain doesn't want to
yeah,
fail. So it's gonna want to get that uni assignment done. But then it also wants to scroll Instagram.
yeah,
So it kind of clearly it means that the fact you then chose the Instagram means that the even though you were doing the assignment, the second part of your brain green lit, let's go on Instagram and scroll. And
yeah,
that's where I think you have that dichotomy, because that's the reason it's called doom scrolling, because you're scrolling on it because one part of your brain is green lighting to continue and the other part of your brain is screaming, no, I have other work to do. And you're kind of stuck in the middle, right? And
right,
then ultimately you have that regret. You spent 1 or 2 hours and you're there like, damn, I should have just done some work.
yeah,
Could you explain that a bit further to me? I'm like the kind of the analogy you gave before got me like 60% of the way to understanding
yeah,
it. Could you explain that particular thing a bit further to me in terms of why does the brain do that when it has different
yeah,
wants? Why does it choose this one, and why does that lead us to have regret ultimately?
yeah. So these are really good questions, and a lot of what I said was really to segue into going deeper to help it understand more. So let's start with the wanting mechanism. So the part of the brain that creates wants, as I mentioned, it's completely unrestrained. It's
Hmm.
creating endless wants one after another. You can think of this part of the brain as a simple on off switch that gets flipped based on certain cues. It sees someone with nice shoes and it wants it. A nice car drops by and it wants that as well. We see somebody buy a new house and we want that too. And the wanting mechanism creates so many wants in a single day. No one person has the time, energy, or resources to achieve in a lifetime.
Hmm.
So even Krishna, if you lived multiple lives, you couldn't achieve, let alone enjoy all the wants your brain is producing in a single month.
Hmm.
That's how much wants our brain is creating. And so the wanting mechanism doesn't check to see if you have the time, energy, and resources to achieve a want. It simply creates wants. Nor does it check to see if a want is achievable or fulfilling. It simply creates wants. And what's really more important to understand is that even while you're working on one want, the mechanism will create other wants to chase. And so the wanting mechanism, in a lot of ways, is the reason we buy things that we don't need, crave things that aren't actually fulfilling, and in a lot of ways, why people cheat when they're already in a relationship.
Hmm.
And it's also the reason why it's so hard to do the work or do that thing, because this mechanism pulls us in so many directions, it's difficult to move in one. And so to answer your question, it's, hey, I'm studying, but now I'm on text and now I've opened Instagram and I'm doom scrolling. Well,
Yeah.
it's because our wanting mechanism is constantly creating wants. And again, it sometimes it doesn't care that you're already working on something or working towards one want. It'll create other wants to chase. And so this is just a small example of how you could be working on one want, studying,
Hmm.
and then it trigger other wants like the texting and the doom scrolling. But it happens in much bigger scales too. We might set a goal to diet and exercise, and as we're working on that, we'll get our brain will trigger a want for getting a new car, and then
Hmm.
wanting to get new shoes, and then having a relationship, and then it's constantly pulling us in all these directions. So this is why I said our own wants can be a hindrance to achieving it.
Yeah.
It creates a challenge.
Yeah.
Now, what keeps us from sticking with something like studying? Like, we know we should study, our parents want us to study, teachers say what will happen if we don't study. And so, one of the reasons it's difficult is because we have that wanting mechanism that's pulling us in other directions. But that's not the only thing that creates a challenge. So, anytime a want stands before us, it gets filtered by this part of the brain called resistance using a whole host of criteria. And there are many criterias the brain will go through to decide if it should let you do it. And some of the more common ones include things like beliefs. So I had mentioned when I first got into this, the main thing I was hearing was beliefs. And so if you don't believe something is possible or that it's possible for you, the brain will prevent action. Makes sense, right? But there's a lot more to it. It also has to do with habits. If you haven't developed a habit to study or to take a task from beginning to end, it's going to be difficult to do. And then anytime we're doing something, especially something new, we're going to start to move out of our comfort zone. And the brain likes familiar over unfamiliar. So anytime we're moving forward in a goal, by nature of moving forward in a goal, we're going to move into something unfamiliar. Even though logically it seems familiar because we see other people do it, to the unconscious, it still is threatening and it's like moving into uncharted territory. And so the brain will say, hey, hold on, we're going into an area that we haven't been to before. Yes, although we were at a place that wasn't great, at least it was some place that was safe. So why don't we just continue moving back? So these are a couple of the criterias that brain evaluates, but it goes deeper than that. It goes into our self-image. For example, if a person doesn't have a self-image of being a studious person or a successful person, the brain will prevent action. It's like, oh, you're trying to do this thing, but our self-image is not in line with it, or it's not in line with the success. So I'm going to prevent you or stop you. But it goes even deeper than that. And I don't want to harp on all the reasons for resistance, but this will give you an understanding of what's happening when the brain is evaluating a want and desire, is going through all these things. And if even one of the things doesn't check off, it will make it difficult to do. Now, what's really interesting, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I do want to come full circle on the the question you asked, is when our brain stops us from doing something, it doesn't tell us that it's stopping us. It doesn't say, hey, Krishna, you know that thing that you're drawing, trying to study? Well, it goes against our self-image, so I can't let you do it. Or that goal of yours, well, our habits are not in line with it, so we're just going to stand here and do nothing. That's not what happens. Resistance manifests other ways. And resistance has all sorts of tricks up its sleeve to keep us from taking action and moving forward. And some of these tricks are so sneaky, you wouldn't think of them as tricks, which is why they work so well and why we so easily fall for them. And so some of the more obvious tricks are things like texting and doom scrolling. What I mean by that is you may have a desire to study. The brain evaluates that desire using these criterias and it says, oh, we don't believe that we'll do well on the exam, and studying is not in line with my self-image. And then it also hits up against some of the other resistance that I haven't discussed yet. So I can't let you do it. But instead of telling you that I'm not going to let you do it or give you reasons, I'm going to have you avoid this in sneaky ways. Hey, why don't we go text this person that we haven't talked to in a while? Oh, yeah, you know what? I remember I was supposed to go on Instagram to, message someone. Oh, now that I'm Instagram, let me just continue scrolling. So this is a trick of resistance. When we're doing these things, it usually means we want to be doing something else, but the brain has decided it doesn't want us to do that. So it has us come into avoidance behavior. I know this was kind of long-winded, so hopefully you were able to follow it and it made sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. It just opened my eyes to how deep and twisted your own brain works against you in some ways. You were kept on going like, and we have this layer, and then we go a deeper layer, and then you said self-image, and I was like, oh yeah, I never thought about our self-image as well. It clearly shows why there's no one size fits all, because if there's so many variables that affect us, and if there's so many reasons why we might not be able to stay focused on what we know is the correct aim, we keep getting distracted, right? And I do agree, things like going onto Instagram doom scrolling is probably one of the more physical, easier to see, and bigger things. But the small distractions, right? It always it like ultimately becomes like a fatigue, because if you're
Yeah.
trying to focus on, let's say you're trying to revise for an exam. I have an exam coming up in a week's time. So if you let's say you're trying to revise for an exam, and then you keep on thinking about something, like you hear a nice car's engine, so you start daydreaming about BMWs, and then you see like I don't know, somewhere like like a subliminal advert for Nike or Adidas. So suddenly your brain's thinking about, oh yeah, I do need those trainers. They're on my Christmas wish list actually. These small things, you don't actually go out and buy the car. You don't even go off your web page to go onto the BMW website. But the fact you're thinking about it has already taken you away from what you're supposed to be doing. And these are like
Exactly.
these are like such small things which everyone experiences. It's so difficult to counter. And I wanted to kind of ask the question of, like, too much of what we see online is about discipline. So you, even though you mentioned it's not to do with motivation, which I would agree, like motivation is like mood swings. It comes and goes.
Yeah.
You can't rely on it. It's not reliable. But then the alternative is discipline. But discipline is almost like this harder emotion of like what you want to do. You have to
Yeah.
stop yourself and stay focused. And what you were saying about habits, beliefs, goals, it really starts to sound a lot more of that discipline picture of, right, you need to set yourself strong habits. You need to have a strong belief in yourself. You need to have goals, smart goals of what you want to achieve. And so you can stay disciplined. But discipline not only is a good thing, but it also has those negative connotations of like self restriction in a way. Um, is that the step you have to take? Or is there a softer way to do it in a way that you don't feel like you're having to discipline yourself every day?
Yeah. So this is a really good question. The discipline piece becomes challenging because of resistance.
Yeah.
It's not that we don't want to be disciplined, but then resistance comes up and it says, oh, I don't think this is possible.
Mm,
And what's even more important about our beliefs, it's not about what we think is possible to do, but what's
mm,
possible for us. So we may think something is possible, but deep down, not believe that it's possible for us. And so when we start to do it, we start hitting up against that deep core belief that it's not possible
mm,
for us. And because the unconscious doesn't believe that, it starts to make progress slower than it needs to be. It makes it harder, and then the discipline becomes harder. The same thing with habits. For anything to become comfortable and easy requires building the muscle for it or the habit to do it. And if we haven't, it's awkward and it's painful and it just doesn't feel right. And that's enough pain for resistance to say, no, we're not going to do that. And so we do have to go through some pain to build the muscle so it becomes comfortable and easy. Unfortunately, when there is pain, resistance doesn't notice certain pains as good pain, like healing
mm,
pain or pain required for growth. For resistance, in many ways, is an on off switch. If there is pain, stop it. And so, if we're going to do something that's going to require going through some pain to develop the muscle and habit, resistance isn't going to go, well, eventually this pain will go away. It's there's pain here, and I'm designed to avoid pain. So I'm going to avoid this activity just to avoid the pain. And the
mm,
same thing with the comfort zone. So that's really what's making our discipline difficult to maintain, is that resistance comes in. And so, yes, we can set the goals, we can break them down into action steps, we can understand what exactly it is we want. But then the next step is that we're going to hit up in resistance, because a part of ourselves, it's going to get in the way in actually moving forward with those goals and the action steps. And that's where people are struggling, because
mm,
they assume just by knowing what I want to do, I should be able to do it. And that works up to a certain point, and that point is when we start hitting up in the resistance. And I like what you said, because you're like, this is kind of twisted, and in a way it is. And this is one of the reasons people struggle, because they just assume things should be easy. But
yeah.
the human brain is extremely complex. In fact, some would say it's the pinnacle of complexity in the known universe.
Mm,
And hearing me talk now, you can probably understand why that is. And there are layers as well. So, have you ever like known someone who took a tip and technique and then started getting really great success? And then when you try to apply that tip or technique, it didn't really work for you. Well, it comes down to these layers. That person may have had one layer of resistance, and that tip and technique addressed that specific resistance. And once they did, they could go out and do the thing and have success. But another person could have had a different resistance. So that tip and technique wouldn't have worked on that particular resistance they had. Or if they had the same resistance and it worked on it, they had a couple more underneath that kept them stuck. So this is why a lot of times when we see people doing well, we assume that they have something or they have this special quality that we don't. And it's not that it's not that they have something, it's that they don't have something, and that's resistance. They don't have all these resistance holding them back where we do. And it sucks because some people do have more resistance than others, and we do have to work through it. And because some of this stuff is so complex, it's not easy to unearth. Like it took me decades of studying this stuff to unearth some of these things. And not every coach or therapist is going to understand these things. And so it does become a challenge.
Yeah, I agree that discipline kind of picture, it does work on paper, but in reality, because of how varied we are as individuals, it won't work for everyone. And
I love what you said. I have to stop because this is the most important thing that I'm trying to get people to understand is a lot of the stuff that we learn works great on paper. It works so good on paper. And I remember, reading books, attending seminars, and having coaches, and they would break this down. They had a system. And when I heard it, it's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense and it could work. But the actual application becomes a much different story. And now I have heard so many people and I've done so much work on my own, I can hear something and be like, okay, this sounds great on paper, but I can almost guarantee you actually haven't put this into practice, because if you had, you actually wouldn't be saying what you're saying. And so now I can tell who has actually applied what they're preaching, because for me at this point, it's very easy to discern what works great on paper and what doesn't. So
this got me thinking also that I used to believe when it comes to getting distracted, it was because your brain naturally goes for the short-term reward, which makes sense because we would rather go for fast food, unhealthy food, than go stick to the diet. We'd rather go on Instagram than stick to the assignment, because usually the good thing or the thing that's right for us is usually more of a longer term or working towards something bigger, like the bigger picture. Whereas, of course, these distractions they'll give you that hit right now. So
that's part of it. You said something and I want to riff on it. And again, I apologize for interrupting.
Go for it.
I think this will be really helpful. So that's part of the equation. Our brain is designed to go for short term over the long term, especially if it hasn't been trained or disciplined.
Yes.
Right? So the less work we have put to resist short-term desires, the more we're just going to naturally fall in line with that. So this comes back into habits. So if a person hasn't developed a muscle or habit for refraining from short-term gratification, then it's going to be just difficult to do. And when short-term gratification is presented, it's going to move towards that. But there's a deeper thing going on. A lot of times when we are trying to do something that requires a little bit more work and more time, and the brain feels for one reason or another we shouldn't or can't do it, and resistance is coming up, I mentioned then the tricks start showing up. And usually the tricks focus on the short term. So when we're falling into short-term gratification, it's usually because it's a trick to something bigger that we're wanting that resistance is holding us back from. And then this kind of circles back to our wants. As I mentioned, we have a part of the brain that creates wants, and it's creating endless wants. And so it can create a want for both something that's short-term and long-term. It's just that it goes through all these criteria to decide which one to pick. If we have developed a habit and muscle for long-term things, and if we are comfortable getting out of our comfort zone, and if our self-image is in line with the success that this long-term thing will bring us, and if the other resistance are also in line, then we can do that longer-term thing.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more nuanced than simply saying, "Oh, the brain defaults to short-term." That's
Yeah.
true, but
Yeah.
there's more to it.
Yeah. And that's what I was trying to like, that's what I was realizing as well, that even though I used to believe it was just short term, because of the things you mentioned, just habits, beliefs, and goals, it might not just be a short term gain it's focusing on. If you are the person that, like, if you're the person that every single time you try to get something done, you always get distracted, your brain will decide that that is your character. Your brain will
Yes.
decide that that is, you will start to believe that this is how I act all the time. So you'll go, oh, well, this is just another one in my long week of getting distracted. So it's not that much of a difference.
Yeah.
Whereas for someone who maybe has developed the habit or the self belief that I'm not someone who's going to allow Instagram, I'm not someone who's going to allow my mind to wander, for them to then start even thinking about Instagram, there's more of a resistance there because the brain's like, this is not you.
Yes.
This is not how you're supposed to act. This is not how you act the whole week. You were fine. Why is this happening now? Let's not do it. Let's keep going. We have a streak right
Yeah.
now. So I
Exactly.
think you have, it's like, it's not just a short term. It's more just like you have to have the foundations in place with those
Yeah.
habits, beliefs, and goals. And ultimately, like you said, deeper, that self image. You need to become the
Yeah.
self image of someone who doesn't allow yourself to wander from the main goals you have.
Yeah.
And it's going to be difficult. Like you said, if you are someone who's been doing this for years and you've always allowed yourself to struggle, suddenly changing into the person who's disciplined and able to stay focused is going to be difficult because your brain's going
Yeah.
to try to scream and say, no, I really want this. I really want
Yeah.
this. You're going to have to push yourself through it. And once you've come through the other side, you realize that you're a different person.
Yeah.
And one thing I was wondering is, even though getting distracted and finding the fun things and not focusing on the long term goal, going for the short term pleasure, right? It gives us pleasure. Like scrolling on Instagram, as much as you can call it doom scrolling, you do get some kind of dopamine and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the one thing that you don't quite get is the fulfillment. And that's usually afterwards. You don't get the fulfillment because you know that what you've just done hasn't moved the needle.
Yeah.
Because usually, if you're a driven person, if you're ambitious, you know what you need to do to move the needle forward, and there'll be 100 different ways to get the happiness, but they don't move the needle forward. So
Yeah.
is there a way that someone could maybe in a way weaponize that fulfillment to kind of reverse engineer it so that they can start to build that self-image of someone who can stick to the movement that moves the needle?
Yeah. So again, a question that has many layers, and I'll try to address some of the layers. One of the things about the wanting mechanism is that oftentimes it gets triggered based on stimuli. So if you
Mm,
remember the examples I gave, we see the latest iPhone and we want it. Nice car drives by, we want that too.
yeah.
And that means one of the best ways to maintain discipline is to contain the wanting mechanism. The less want the brain is pulling us towards, the less discipline we need and the less effort we need to put in resisting those things, right? So, one of the best ways a person can do is find a way to ground or contain that wanting mechanism. Otherwise, it'll pull us in all sorts of directions and it'll be difficult to move in any one. And the way to do that is for a person to pick one want and cut out all the rest. No matter what other wants your brain is producing, don't think about, don't worry about, and don't consider them until the first is finished and complete. Now, this isn't always easy, especially
Mm,
for a person with an overactive wanting mechanism.
mm,
And that's because we don't necessarily pick and choose our wants. As I mentioned, they get triggered and stimulated. And a person with an overactive wanting mechanism, it's constantly being triggered and stimulated all of the time. So for such a person, it really helps to take it one step further and cut out as many triggers and stimuli as possible. Now, unfortunately, that means cutting out television, media, and in a lot of ways, even people, because
mm,
seeing others doing and having things can make us want to do and have those things as well. And this really hits home for me because for most of my life, especially when I was younger, I had an overactive wanting mechanism. I was triggered and stimulated by all the different things to do. It's the reason I've written 12 books, traveled to 100 countries, and done all sorts of activities like skydiving, scuba diving, rock climbing, yoga, dance, and so much more. My brain was stimulated by all the different things to do. And these wants were overpowering me. They would trigger, as soon as a want was triggered, it would make me lose interest on something I was already working on, or
Mm.
it made me forget about it. And it was actually a painful experience. It would tighten my muscles and put my head in a knot. And just reading personal development, which can be inspirational, which means it could trigger wants, was enough to have my mind go all over the place. And I
Mm.
realized if I wanted to accomplish anything in life, I had to get a handle on this mechanism. And I did exactly what I suggested. I cut out television, cut out social media, cut out YouTube, stopped reading internet articles, and I even cut out people. And I essentially created a bubble for myself that contained as much triggering stimuli as possible. Now, I know this sounds extreme, but I personally believe that someone with an overactive wanting mechanism, this may not just be the best solution, but the only solution, because as I mentioned, our wants are unruly. Once they get triggered, it's actually difficult to release it. And
Mm.
once they get triggered, it's actually difficult to focus on anything else. So instead of playing this game of like fighting and resisting all these wants, it's better for not to have these wants come up in the first place so we can just focus on that one thing.
Yeah.
And it's become even more challenging because now we do live in a society and culture where there's so many things to do, so many things to have, and so many experiences to enjoy that it's really hard to kind of contain it all. And when
Mm.
I said I really created a bubble that contained as much stimuli, I really did. And in some ways, I had to, I don't want to use the word isolate because I don't want people to think that's what it requires. But a person just needs to do what it's going to help them to contain as many triggers and stimuli as possible.
Mm.
So that is, one aspect of the thing. And then there are other aspects that come into play as well, because um, when we are trying to maintain the resistance, the complexity of resistance can come into our tricks. And then it's kind of being aware of the tricks. And so we don't kind of move back and forth between the desires.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Prevention is always better than cure
Yeah.
in most scenarios, and that's kind of what it sounds like. Rather than fighting the wants, which ultimately would be you fighting biology, because we are designed to constantly want
Yeah.
things. Humans are inherently curious and inherently want something better. That's how we are here, and we have developed society this way. But on an individual level, if you can limit those stimuli, then you have a lower chance of your wanting mechanism suddenly getting distracted and going, oh, you know what? We actually do want that car. Now that I've just heard that V8 engine, it just
Yeah.
reminds me I need that car because it's not helpful. And this is not, as you were speaking, my mind was telling me, but doesn't this make it sound like the wanting mechanism is a bad thing? Doesn't this make it sound like this inherent thing we have inside us should not exist? And I was thinking, well, no, because it's not a bad thing to have a wanting mechanism, because otherwise you'd be just numb. You wouldn't want to experience anything. You would just live your life doing the same thing all the time. It's good to want something, but I suppose the way to phrase it is when you know that you should be focusing on something else, that's not good to be wanting loads of hundreds of other things.
Yeah.
If you're on holiday, then it's fine. Go have your wanting mechanism. Do what you want. You want to
Yeah.
go on. You want to go skiing. You want to do this. You want to do that. Go for it, right? But when you know, when that kind of separate side of thinking thinks that no, I need to focus on this particular thing to do my business, my podcast, my uni assignments, whatever. That's the time you know that the wanting mechanism will get in the way, and it's not the thing that's going to move the needle forward.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to use this move the needle forward more in my own thinking, because otherwise, as a ambitious entrepreneur, whatever you want to call it, you start to have that sparkly object syndrome where you think that everything is going to move the needle forward, but actually when you boil it down, it's not. It's only
Yeah.
the one or two things which you know about that are going to work for you. And so that's why I want to ask, because you have said, and I looked at your website, you've gone across the world, you've had all sorts of experiences, some of them more mainstream, some of them quite niche experiences. And you said that this all helped you to kind of fine tune and understand what this problem is and how you can develop it.
Yeah.
But someone else, it might, or for me, it makes me feel a bit like, how can I get to the same level of clarity as you when obviously I don't have the 20 years of exploration behind me and learning? What would you say to that? What has that journey kind of taught you? And if we were to distill it down, kind of what can someone get from it?
So this journey has taught me that it's really important to work within the principles of the mind and body. The reason I can
Okay.
get so much success for my clients and even quickly is because I don't get lost in all the stuff that is being said or the things that sound good on paper. I focus on the principles. And if we can focus on the principles, it's much easier to move forward. And one of the most important principles that we can learn is when the brain triggers a want, it releases some really powerful sensations, very arousing feelings like, oh, yes. And these feelings can create they can give the impression that, yes, we could do this goal. We're going to be able to achieve it. And so we have the want. We're flooded with these positive feelings of how great it's going to feel when we achieve it. And it gives us a confidence that we can achieve it. But once those feelings fade, we're just as stuck as we are. So not to rely so much on the positive feelings and the dopamine to get us started and to move forward, because eventually it'll fade and then we're going to have to hit up against resistance.
Yeah.
Right? Two, the other principle is that eventually we will hit up against resistance. And so if we can understand that this path isn't going to be all gloomy or all, sunshine the way our emotions make us feel, then we could be better prepared when roadblocks show up or we hit up detours. But if we don't expect the detours and the roadblocks to come, and when they do come, we get derailed. And then that's when we go into self beat up, thinking I can't do this, I can't do anything, I can't, and things of that nature. And so when we can understand we're working within the principles, then we can be more grounded in how our mind and body works and work within it to be able to move towards our goal. And then the other principle is the tricks. A lot, as I mentioned, when our brain stops us from doing something, it throws up a lot of tricks. And the more obvious tricks include things like television, social media, video games, even drinking and alcohol. And I say these are obvious tricks because when we're doing them, we know we should be doing something different. But then there are sneakier tricks like planning. So a lot of times when when the brain wants us to stop us from doing something, instead of having us taking action, it'll have us plan on taking action. It'll have us go into a really heightened sense of figuring out what to do, how to do it, and in very detail. And all the time we spend on planning is time we're not spending taking action. And
Yes.
because we're not taking action, the tricks win in keeping us from moving forward. Another way a trick manifests is perfectionism. So a lot of times when we want to do something, we get into a heightened sense of doing things really right and correct and making sure all our I's are dotted and T's are crossed. But all that time we spend on perfecting is time that we're not moving the needle, quote unquote, forward. And these are the other more sneaky tricks, and there's tons of them. For example, a lot of times when I'm working with a client, I give them a suggestion or advice, and their mind will start throwing up excuses in their head of why it can't work, won't work, or work for them. And they can go to great lengths to come up with these excuses like, oh, I'm not this type of person. I don't want to support that. It goes against my beliefs and things of that nature. And what I try to help them understand is that, hey, You think you're the ones thinking these excuses, but it's just your resistance. And so, because the excuses are in the person's head, they think they're thinking them. And because they think they're thinking them, they think it's true, when it's really the voice of their resistance. And that voice can seem like it's our voice and hold us back. And what's crazy is there's a lot of people who pay good money to hire coaches and experts just to make up excuses for any advice that they give. And as long as they're making excuses, they stay stuck and not move forward. And so that's another principle that's really important to understand, that I'm keeping an eye out for when I'm working with people. Though there are other more fundamental principles that really drive my decisions and actions and what I choose to do. And before I give one of them, and it's something I learned in my travel journey that a person can learn from my experience, I want to say that when people talk to me or get to know me or learn or see my lifestyle, they think that I'm pretty rigid, that I don't have fun, or that I'm a little too disciplined or a little over the top.
Yeah.
But they don't understand what's driving this. And once you understand, you'll see why I'm like this. And so, one of the most fundamental principles of the mind and body is that there's no pleasure without pain. And to illustrate, as I mentioned, I've traveled to nearly 100 countries. And early on in my 100-country journey, I actually was in Colombia, and I was in Medellin for a few weeks. And I traveled up to Santa Marta for another few weeks. And then I went to Cartagena for another few weeks. And then I took a catamaran from Cartagena to Panama. And it was during a time of the year where the waters are really rough and almost nobody wants to make that trek. But I did, just because of the timing. And it was a rough 5 days. And then I got to Panama, where I stayed in Panama City, then went to Bocas del Toro. And then from there, I took a ferry into Costa Rica. And in that 6 weeks, I didn't have a single hot shower. And a lot of times, I was sleeping in the beaches, so I didn't have showers. I was sleeping in the ocean.
Yeah.
I showered in the ocean and stuff like that. But once I got to Costa Rica, I was in San Jose, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to spend a few dollars more and stay in a nicer hostel. And this hostel had a hot shower. Not only did it have a hot shower, but it had two knobs where I could control the temperature of the water. And I was, when I took that shower and I came out, I was exhilarated. Like, you can just tell the excitement of what it felt like. It was so exhilarating. I hopped on Facebook to tell everybody about my hot shower. Now, the question is, why was that hot shower so pleasurable? Because I've had plenty of hot showers before. In fact, at a certain point, I thought it was my God-given right. The reason it was so pleasurable is because I went through the pain of not having a hot shower for nearly 6 weeks. And when I finally had it, I could enjoy the joy of it. And so this principle is, there's no pleasure without pain. Anytime, like, if it requires going through a certain pain to get the pleasure that we're seeking. You talked about fulfillment. Well, that's what it is. It's that pain that we go through to get that fulfillment. And when we try to cheat the principle, we have to pay the price. So let's say we drink to get pleasure up front. Well, then we have to deal with the pain of a hangover.
Yeah.
If we drink coffee to get that energy and boost and that positive feeling, then we have to deal with the pain of the caffeine crash. If we eat sweets, we get that pleasure up front, but not only do we have to deal with the pain of the sugar crash, but then we have to deal with the pain of the weight that we gain because we do it.
Yeah.
So this is an inescapable principle. And so the reason why I put so much effort in discipline and all of that is because I know there's going to be pleasure at the end. And if I try to go after the pleasure first, I'm going to have to pay the price. So why not pay the price in ways that helps me grow and get sustainable pleasure and fulfillment,
Mm.
which is why I do put a lot more effort in maintaining discipline, doing things that aren't easy, pushing out of my comfort zone, because I know there's going to be a level of pleasure that's not possible any other way. Like you can't get
Wow.
it through doom scrolling. You can't
Yeah.
get it from these instant gratification. It can only come from the pain of doing something that you're either scared to do, that you're uncomfortable to do, that you haven't built the muscle for doing. And that requires some extended time, because the more time you experience the pain, the more pleasure there is at the end. Now, this isn't to say that people should go out and force themselves to have pain, but it's more of a motivation to know that although your brain thinks, hey, if I do this, there's going to be pain, you have to step in and say yes, but there's going to be a level of pressure that's not possible any other way. So I am going to
Mm.
continue doing it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's quite a profound answer. And I'll just like, I will talk about this, but just almost going back to the beginning of the answer when you're talking about the sneaky tricks, I felt like you're talking to my soul directly when you said things like planning and perfectionism also count as tricks. I was thinking to myself, oh my God, like I'm speechless right now. This question is just like, it's so true whenever it comes to anything I'm doing. Obviously, now, I mean, it comes down to the same problem of kind of you have to build that self belief. So now with the podcast, obviously, I've been able to build some level of habits where I know that perfectionism is not good, because I know that you have to keep publishing the episode. You need to keep doing the
Yeah,
guesting. You can't try to make the same episode as edited as a professional podcast, because you'll just drive yourself around in circles. You need to just keep
yeah,
taking the action. But at the beginning, and a lot of people around me as well who are still at the beginning, it's that same concept of, nah, I don't think this is for me, or maybe if I was a bit richer, maybe I could do this, or maybe if I was just, a bit more extroverted, this could be for me, but not right now. Or they might be working on a project or assignment or dissertation or whatever, and they're saying, oh, you know what, if only this had this extra thing, then maybe I'd be able to submit it. And you initially think, wow, this person's so on it, but you realize that they're actually not taking action. It's just all in the mind. It's all this concept of,
they're
I
avoiding.
need to be perfect, otherwise I can't take the action. I'm
Yeah,
lacking this one thing, or I can't take the action. And what ends up happening on paper is nothing. Nothing gets written down, nothing gets submitted, nothing gets produced, even though you did all this mental planning and thinking about
yeah.
it. And
And
when you
so it
phrase it that
gives you the
way,
illusion that you're making progress without actually
yeah,
making progress.
and it
Now
almost
you
gives you a
know why I
fulfillment
call
as
them
well.
tricks, because they're so
Yeah.
sneaky and tricky. Yeah,
Yeah, it gives you that fulfillment as well, because you spend 1 hour brainstorming anything. Your brain goes,
yeah,
"Well, that was a really good 1 hour. We did a lot of work there. Let's reward ourselves." You do too many of those 1 hour sessions. You realize, well, actually, I've done loads of these brainstorming sessions, got nothing done, and I keep
yeah,
telling myself I'm making progress. We're moving that needle.
yeah,
It's so sly and sneaky. You have
yeah,
to be really self-aware and identify when you're actually taking steps, and when your
yeah,
brain is tricking you into thinking you're taking steps. And
yeah.
yeah, it's quite scary, right? But
Yeah, and now you understand what I meant, because for the listeners, Krishna and I talked right before the podcast, and he was talking about, hey, so if you can give some simple solutions to overcome resistance, and I preface by saying, with
there isn't one.
resistance, there isn't anything simple. Now you're
No.
understanding why there is a
Yeah, exactly.
complexity to it, and it's unfortunate because it doesn't get talked about. And because it doesn't get talked about, people think things should be easier. And for some, it is. But for people who have a higher level of resistance, this is what we're faced with.
Yeah.
And what I like to tell people is that I don't make the rules. So don't get mad at me because, I'm saying this. I just try to help people understand them.
Yeah.
And one thing that you talked about was the tricks and how scary they are. Well, Krishna, it gets even more scary because these tricks can be really sneaky, and they get even more sneaky and manipulative the closer we get to accomplishing the goal. And they can be as much as getting into an accident or getting sick,
Mm.
because and those usually show up when we're right about at the cusp of the finish line, or we reach the finish line and we just need to keep going to reap the rewards. And that's because when we get into an accident, it really derails our progress. We can't focus on anything until we rectify that accident. And because it takes our focus away, we can't move forward on that thing.
Mm.
And the same thing when we're getting sick. And usually getting sick and accidents are a last ditch effort on our resistance. It usually means we're at the cusp or on a breakthrough of getting to the next level or the next plateau. And it's putting in all its effort to make sure we slow progress. Because just like accidents, when we get sick, we literally have no energy. We just can't do anything. We just lay in bed. And because we have no energy, we don't have energy to do the thing. And because we can't do that thing, we're not making progress and the tricks win. In fact, I'm at a point in my life, anything that's keeping me from moving the needle forward, I just assume as a trick.
Okay.
That's it. I mean, I just assume I'm not moving forward in this or everything I'm doing, or what am I doing? And it's likely a trick because it's not moving the needle forward. So,
Gosh. So like, yeah, like, almost trying to piece it all together. I mean, if you think about how we started this conversation, it was just about what is the problem, and I use quite a big example of scrolling on Instagram, doom scrolling, as a very classic. It's like the classic example,
the
quite
classic
topical for the young.
trick. Yep.
Classic trick, right? But yeah, you've kind of delved deeper into saying that initially we doom scroll not only for that short term gain, but then also because we don't have that confident self image that we are someone that doesn't doom scroll. So you continue. And
Yeah.
when I asked you about things like, okay, so how can we try to fix that? Is it only via discipline, the hard hammer of discipline? And you said even then it's difficult. It's not easy to get the hard hammer of discipline and think that you suddenly mold a
Because of
square into a
resistance.
circle
Yeah.
because of resistance. Because if you are the person who's built up that self image of someone who gets distracted all the time, then suddenly trying to build that self image of someone who doesn't is going to be
Yeah.
difficult. And we know the brain always tries to oppose a change, and it
Yeah.
always likes to stay in its comfortable bubble, right? And even if you do get to the point where you're quite disciplined, like you are right now, Cam, tricks still present themselves
Oh,
in the
yeah.
form
Tricks
that
still present for me. Yeah. And I
sometimes
have to
you
be
can
aware of it.
yeah, sometimes you can notice that this is a trick. Sometimes it's so nuanced and tiny that you don't even notice that your
Yeah.
brain has already wandered, and it ultimately leads to this kind of like fatigue when
Yeah.
it happens too much and too often.
Yeah. And I'll even go as far as to say sometimes you could notice the tricks and you're acting out the trick and you can't stop it. Because
Oh
now
my.
we mentioned doom scrolling is a trick. And it's easy for a person to be doom scrolling, realize, oh, wait, I'm in a trick, but then they still can't stop doom
Uh-huh.
scrolling.
Tell me about it. Tell me
Or
about it.
or we find ourselves in perfectionism and we realize, oh, wait, Cam talked about how perfectionism could be a trick. And I'm going into an overly heightened state of perfectionism. I should stop, but then I can't. I just keep going, or I keep planning, or I keep doing these other tricks. So even when we realize it, sometimes it's hard to stop. So this
Yeah.
might be a good time to really talk about some solutions that can really help us move forward.
Yeah. What can
And
someone do?
yeah, and again, it does help to understand all of this first so we know what we're up against.
Mm.
To win the battle, we have to understand the enemy. And when we understand what's going on, it's going to be much easier to win the battle. So the first thing is we got to get a handle on our wanting mechanism. If it's going to be pulling us in all sorts of directions, then we want to find a way to manage it or contain it so we're not spending all our time and energy just resisting all the wants. We can spend it on actually working on the thing. And then when we are working on it, we're going to hit up a resistance. And so it helps to identify what those resistance are and to use solutions that work on it so we can move past it. And then also be aware of the tricks because our brain, as we're learning, is pretty sneaky. And so the more aware we can be, the more we can see when tricks are coming up. And a great primer for this is just to understand anything that's keeping you from moving the needle forward is likely a trick.
Mm.
But there are ways we can, um, there are things we can do that can help us move the needle forward. And one of the simplest things is with self talk. When we're dealing with resistance, it really helps to do little things that get big results. Little actions that we can take that have big effects on what's going on internally as well as our progress. And I personally believe self talk are the simplest thing a person can do. And for a person who doesn't understand what self talk is, it's simply statements that you say or repeat to yourself of the changes that you want to have or have happen. So let's take that example of the person who studies and wants to do well on the exam. They could create a self talk statement like, I am a studious person. I enjoy study. I enjoy studying. I am doing well in my classes and exam. 3 simple statements. You may not think that these statements can have that much effect, but it's huge. And that's because words are extremely powerful. They have a huge influence on our brain and have an huge influence on our thinking and our actions. And if we can repeat positive words that that move us in the direction that we want,
Yeah.
then those words will seep into our mind and start to create the behaviors and habits that move us in that direction. In fact, those words will actually start changing our self image. So, if we don't have a self image that we're studious or we could do well in school, by saying, I'm studious, I enjoy studying, I'm doing well in class and exams, it starts creating that self image. And when we can change in the unconscious level, it makes it much easier to do the thing. And that's because most of the resistance arises because we're battling with our unconscious. We're battling with a part of ourselves that doesn't want us to do that thing.
Yeah.
Now, if that part isn't there and actually wants to support us, it actually makes it easier to do that thing. That's why there are some students who enjoy studying. They enjoy going to the library and reading and all of that because all of their inner stuff is in line with that behavior. So they don't have to battle with themselves to do it. Their inner self actually creates a motivation and drive to do that. And that can be achieved with self talk. And what's really great about self talk is it can also give us ideas about where our resistance might be. For example, if we are repeating the statement, I'm a studious person, I enjoy studying, in the beginning, the mind will fight back and say, no, you're not. And it'll trigger memories of all the times you were doom scrolling. And then it might even trigger memories of what people might think if they find out that you're doing well. And all of that is data to your resistance. Because if your mind says, no, you're not, well, that's good indication of what your self-image is. Your self-image is a person who doesn't study. If it starts triggering memories of the other things you're doing, then it gives you idea of where your tricks are or what some of your other behaviors and habits that have been ingrained in you. And then if it triggers fear, like, or what people would think, now you know that a part of the reason you're not studying is because you don't want people to think that you're a studious person. It's much easier to feel like you're a cool person. And if people realize you're not cool, it can affect your status amongst your friends, or they could be pain and rejection. And the more you repeat, the more data you'll get. But what's really key is not to stop when the uncomfortable reaction comes up, but to keep going, because the uncomfortable reaction is just an initial reaction. The more you say it, the more it'll start to subside. And the more it subsides, the easier it'll be, the more the resistance goes away. And the more the resistance goes away, the easier it'll be to do the thing. And the more you do it, the more the words will be reinforced. But the key is you have to, one, repeat the statements. Self talk, I didn't use the word affirmations. I said self talk very deliberately because it's about talking out the words. You can either do it out loud or in your head. It's not about writing it, it's not about putting it in your mirror, it's not about looking at it. It's about talking it. And the key is to keep doing it. And the reason I say keep doing it is that, and just like all the other tricks, once the self-talk starts making progress, our brain will be like, "Oh, I don't need to do it anymore because I'm doing the results." And then I say it's a trick because as soon as we stop the self-talk, the progress starts to slow and it starts to stop, and the tricks win in keeping us moving forward. So it's one of those things that we keep doing. In fact, I have a set of self-talk statements for different areas of my life, and I repeat it regularly. Like I have a set of
Mm,
statements I repeat in the morning when I get up. I have a set of statements I repeat in the evening when I'm going to bed. I have a set of statements I repeat when I'm in the car. I have a set of statements I repeat when I'm, going about doing things on my own. Like maybe if I'm cleaning the dishes, I have self-talk statements running in my head. And all of that really helps to make moving past resistance so much easier. Because if I had to battle against myself to do all the things that I'm wanting to do in life, it would just be too much of a
yeah.
struggle. But if I have a part of me pushing me to do those things, it's reminding me, hey, Cam, remember you want to get on podcast. You've got a podcast with Christian at 8 a.m. Instead of going, instead of making me forget that I had the podcast, or when I remember the podcast, I have these feelings like, oh no, I don't want to do that. Instead
Mm,
of, so it makes it so much easier. And we can start with self talk. Now, I do want to say that this topic is much more complex. There's more challenges to our wants, there's more causes of resistance, there's way more tricks than I've discussed, and there's more things that we can do to move forward, but this should be a good primer to get started. I really think
yeah.
self-talk is one of the best and simplest ways for a person to start shifting what's going on internally and
Mm.
actually start changing those things that the criteria the resistance uses. So by repeating self-talk, it can improve our beliefs. It can start to develop habits. It can help us get out of our comfort zone. It can change our self-image. It can work through a lot of the other stuff. And a person just needs to think of the end outcome, turn it into a statement, and then repeat that statement.
Oh, I kind of like that example because it's so transferable. Everyone can do it. Anyone can do it, and it's quite
Anyone
simple.
can do it, and it's simple. And that's the key to resistance is that,
And I
go
also
ahead.
like it. Sorry to interrupt you. Because it's different to self affirmations. Because if you already got hundreds of thoughts in your mind, and this whole topic has been about the thoughts that your mind creates. If you were to just add another thought, which is a self affirmation, it kind of gets diluted or drowned out. Um, you don't give it a importance maybe because your brain maybe thinks, well, you're full of, I don't know, self hate, or you're full of distractions. For you to just think, oh, I have a podcast recording, your brain will be like, well, I'm just gonna ignore that and move on. I think speaking out loud almost switches your brain to thinking, well, this clearly is important because it was given the opportunity to be spoken out loud.
Yeah.
If that kind of makes sense. So speaking out loud does give it that. It does allow it to cut through the chaos in your mind and give
Yes.
you that clarity that this is something that's quite important because it was spoken. And if you repeat it over and over again, then it further kind of reinforces that
Yeah.
image. Because as we've already delved into, and I totally agree, this is definitely not a full deep dive into this topic because it's impossible to do in one podcast episode. But one of the deepest parts I think we were able to get to was that self image, how everything really does kind of bounce off that self image that you've created for yourself. And that's where a lot of the solutions, but also where a lot of the problems lie. It's
Yeah.
in that self image. So, this is one way if you repeat it constantly to yourself by speaking it, it helps you to build that self image even if you don't have it right now. Let's say you have a self image of someone who's doesn't get distracted. You would know maybe at this point that no, that's not me. I know that I'm weaker than that. I'm someone who
Yeah.
gets distracted. I'm someone who can't stay focused. But just you can whittle it down, and over the weeks and months, if you keep doing it, you'll start to build it as like, no, no, no. I've said it enough
Yeah.
times. I now feel like someone who doesn't get distracted. Or you might even see that one time you pick up your phone and you put it back down and go, whoa, just for today, I'm not going to try and doom scroll. I'm just going to keep my
Yeah.
phone down. And one thing I've started to do is just turn your phone off. Sounds so simple, right? Just turn it off.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's like there's so many problems in this in terms of your self image, your habits, your beliefs, your goals, and the tricks kind of working their way through those habits to get to you. But then your solutions are also things like how can you first of all use prevention rather than cure. So how can you try to limit the amount of stimuli you have so you don't even have to think about trying to
Yeah.
fight this thing inside your subconscious? But then also, if you are having to fight it, how can you use affirmations to almost in a softer way try to fight it and try to like give yourself the
And
confidence that you
and
can do
really
something?
reduce the fight. How can we reduce that fight is where the self-talk comes in. So a
Yeah.
lot of my work is working on the unconscious level. It's not about fighting against resistance because
Yeah.
resistance will fight against our efforts until the day you die.
Mm.
And so it can be pretty exhausting and draining, which is why can start off strong and then they fall off, or they
Yeah.
go into a pattern of yo-yo dieting because the resistance will always fight against your effort. The goal is to reduce that fight, to reduce the resistance so it's not fighting against your effort, and eventually get to a point where it's actually working with your efforts. It's actually creating the motivation, helping you
Mm.
remember what you need to do, and creating the drive to do those things.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to interrupt, but this was really important piece.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then with the self-talk, I want people to understand just how powerful self-talk is. So let me ask you, Krishna, how would you rate my ability to communicate this idea, even being able to speak about this topic? And be brutally honest.
I think you communicate in a really professional way. What I mean is you're soft spoken, so it allows for me to think clearly, and you go through at a pace which lets me process whilst also understanding what you're saying, because it's not something that you can shout at someone. This is not something you can lecture someone
Yeah,
about. And I can definitely imagine if this was someone else, Cam, they might lecture you, just be like, these are the
yeah,
steps. You need to understand these steps. If you don't understand these steps, you're not going to understand it at all.
yeah,
But that's not going to work. So you give me the time to process it and understand at the same time. So I can come up with these questions, because these are genuine questions that, like, at the beginning I read out like 5 or 6 questions I had ready.
yeah,
As you've been speaking more about it, more keep popping up. What about this? What about this? Can you explain this further?
yeah,
So I think you explain it in a really, really good way. And like you were saying, you can sometimes tell when people try to teach something that they haven't enacted themselves.
yeah,
And that doesn't come across here, because I can tell that you've gone through this process. You've gone through the loopholes that your own mind has created. It's taken you years and years, and you've been able to distill it. As difficult as it is to distill a topic as
yeah,
complex as this, you've tried to distill it down to an understandable format and found
yeah.
frameworks for people to get it.
And that's what I was getting at because this is a complex topic,
Mm,
and I wanted to distill it in a way that people can understand,
yeah.
and it could be simple to understand. Now, what's really interesting to know is that I have never been a very good communicator. I used to
Mm,
stutter, I used to stammer. I had so much thoughts coming in my head that when I would say something, it wouldn't come out quite like how I said it, and it
yeah.
came out very confusing. And I've worked on it. But do you know where I started from? I started from the end result that I was seeking. I wanted to be a better communicator. So I created these self talk statements. I am an excellent communicator. I easily communicate my thoughts, ideas, feelings, experiences, and more. I can write about and verbalize anything. I'm never at a
Mm,
loss for words because the right words come to me quickly and easily. Now, I'm not saying I'm perfect. I know as I was talking, I had some uhs and ums and filler words, and it did take me in some moments to look for the words, but it's far different than how I was even a year ago, where
wow.
again, it was hard for me even to articulate a lot of these points. So, this is how powerful self talk is. We
Mm,
can actually develop skills and habits without even going through a lot of training because I was thinking about hiring a speech coach and things of that nature to help me improve how I spoke and how to get the thoughts in my head out with words from my mouth. But I found that just by with the self-talk that was enough because that let my brain know the direction I was going in, and over time, it allowed me to get to this point.
mm.
So it's actually quite powerful.
Yeah, well, you can't tell Cam at all that you're someone who was nervous to speak. So you've done a great job.
No.
You come across really fluently and professionally. So yeah, and I appreciate that, because this topic is so deep. You kind of need that if you want to convey it properly. If you had someone who can't communicate or convey it in a way that someone who's listening can understand, then what's the point? You've just
Yeah.
lost them basically.
No.
So yeah, thank you for explaining it so far. And I feel like even though I know this is not the deepest dive possible into this thing, in what we've covered in today's episode, it's been a really good starting point in me understanding what it is the flaws that we create, why do we create them, and why they're so difficult to escape from. Because these are the questions where you have to explore deeper. And like I was telling you at the beginning, Cam, this problem many people might not actually speak about. Lots of people struggle with this thing of like, I try to get work done and I end up getting distracted here. I try to work on my business, I get distracted here. I know how to set up my course, but instead of setting up my course, just fell for something else, right? And it can affect us quite deeply because we feel like we're failing. We feel like on one end we want to feel like we're ambitious, but we know deep down we keep allowing ourselves to fall short of what we need to do.
Yeah.
And it can hurt us quite deeply. We don't want to speak to someone about it. We want to just like pretend if it's not happening. So for you to come out and just say it as it is, which is, we know it, everyone goes through it, no matter what age you are, what gender you are, what position you are in life. Even if you, like yourself, Cam, are already really disciplined after decades, you can still fall short and tricks can still affect you. It
Yeah.
just goes to show that it's not you suffering alone. Many people go through it, and there are ways for you to come through on the other end. And it can go all the way from something quite kind of hard, from like cutting off people and your social media and all your distraction, cutting them off completely, so almost living in your own, allowing only what you want to affect you rather than being a victim to the other things. But then it could also be something quite soft in self talk, in things that you can set up for yourself. And it doesn't have to be one sentence, it can be a couple of sentences, it could be different things depending on what activity you're doing, just to get yourself and your brain to start to fit that self identity of someone who doesn't get distracted, someone who can stay focused on the goal. And by the goal, we mean, of course, a thing that is going to move the needle forward, whatever that needle is for you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm sure when I go through it, I was making notes in my diary on the side. I'm sure as I go through it, as I'm editing this, as I listen to this episode again, I'll find more questions and I'll find deeper ways. Or, for example, when I implement some of the things you said, Cam, I know I'll go through and I'll be like, oh, but what about this? Or even though I implemented self talk, I noticed this wasn't working.
Yeah.
And that's why I can already see that there might be like a second episode where we go deeper into this after things have been developed, I've tried things out, more questions come up, more profound questions where we can go deeper and explore this further. But
Yeah.
I really like that you found this topic to talk about and that you can convey it in such an
Yeah.
eloquent way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. And I am doing quite a few podcasts right now to get this, to spread the understanding of internal resistance. And almost every podcast host wants me back because it does go deep. So
There you
it
go.
means I've done a good job. So I do
Yeah, you have.
appreciate that you resonated with this. If I can leave some parting thoughts for your listeners.
Yes.
I know some of the stuff I talked about may seem like a little extreme, like when you're trying for a person with an overactive wanting mechanism, the extent a person has to go to contain that. I know it may sound extreme, especially if it goes against the grain. And this is another reason resistance comes up. Remember, I talked about there's beliefs, habits, comfort zones, self-image, and there's a lot more layers. One of them comes down really to people. Because we humans are pack animals, we evolved to live and survive in a pack. So the brain wants to make sure that we're always around people or has, our community to be in. And unfortunately, it will compromise our beliefs, our goals, and our desires to make sure that we conform to the group. And if we're around unhealthy people, it'll conform to the unhealthy behaviors over the things that we want to do. And this is one of the biggest challenges of resistance, because a lot of our challenge of resistance isn't that we don't have willpower or discipline. It's more of a social challenge, because so many people are doing the opposite. They're not eating well, they're not exercising, they're doom scrolling. Just by being around them, our brain is going to conform to their behavior. And in order to fit with them, it's going to create resistance in doing anything that goes outside of that behavior. So this is something to understand. And the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because when you study the successful people, like the people who had echelon of success, they weren't conforming to what everyone was doing. They didn't get to that success because they're like, oh, this is what everyone's doing. And to fit in, I want to do what they're doing. They had to really break away from that. And not only that, but what I have found is people who aren't successful or don't get the results that they want, let's flip it. People who are successful and operating on a high level, they will do whatever it takes to get the result. Like if they feel like they need to go out and talk to over 100 prospects and get over 100 no's to get that yes, that's what they will do.
Yeah.
If they need to push the boundaries on the current technology and create something that hasn't existed, that's what they'll do. Whereas unsuccessful, they'll try what everyone else is doing, and when they don't get the result, they get frustrated. They either blame themselves or they get angry at the world. So I know some of the things that I'm presenting requires us to push out of what the people around us are doing
Yeah.
and, do take some extreme measures like containing our wanting mechanism. I do want to encourage them that that's what's going to take. If that's what it takes for you, that's just what you do. And that's what it took for me. I mean, how far I have gone to contain not just my wanting mechanism, but to work on resistance is what I needed to do. And so I did it. And I could have cried because, oh, that person doesn't need to work as hard. Or that person's getting success because without having to go through what I'm going through. And I went through a bit of that. But what I realized is that didn't help me. All it did was kept me stuck. But when I shifted to, understanding where I was at, what I needed to move forward, and then just doing it, that's what created the shifts.
Wow. Yeah, it's something that definitely people have to think it through, and it's about picking how deep you want to go into it. How badly do you need to control your
Yeah.
wants? And again, to reiterate, like, we're not saying that the wanting mechanism is a bad thing. We're just saying that in the wrong time it can be a bad thing. And so rather than having this negative self-image, because negative self-image in itself can be a bad thing, rather than having this negative self-image of I have this thing in my brain which is constantly holding me back,
Yeah.
if you view it that way continuously, then like we said with self-talk, if you give yourself negative self-talk, then you'll start viewing yourself badly. We're not
Yeah.
saying there's a fault in you because we're biologically engineered to think this way, but we're just saying that if you can push yourself towards in some way controlling it or not letting it affect you to the point where you feel regret or remorse for letting it control you, then it's a good thing. But don't
Yeah.
push yourself in the other way, in the sense of where you start viewing yourself negatively and you kind of start thinking it's a bad thing, because it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to want more. It's a good thing to strive for more. It's what makes you ambitious. It's what makes you someone who has a forward thinking mind. And that's all good, but only at the right time. And you have to have that way of thinking of when is the right time, when it's not the right time, to let it get activated.
Yeah. And it's okay to do whatever it takes to get the results you're seeking, even though it's considerably more than what others are doing for similar results.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kam, for explaining this. Where can people find out more about the amazing work you do and how you can help people directly?
So I've got 3 gifts for anyone who stayed until this far to listen to us talk. The first is called prompt engineering for your mind. People don't realize, but your brain was the original ChatGPT, and you can prompt it to not only give you solutions, but act on those solutions. And that's the first guide. And again, this is one of those things where we work on the unconscious level to get the results that we want. The second guide is build habits, skills and habits in your sleep. So it's possible to use techniques like self-talk to program your mind to move in the direction that we want. And that's what the second guide will help you do. And the third guide talks about this concept of internal resistance. It goes into explaining some of the other challenges of our wants, as well as other causes of resistance, and even some of the other tricks. And they can get all three of these guides on my website at kamknight.com for free. And
Wow.
then if they want to do one-on-one work, I have developed a technique that helps people kind of break the barrier between the unconscious and unconscious and go into their unconscious to see their own resistance. And so this whole thing is not coaching or even advice giving, is me guiding people into their unconscious and doing the work there, which helps us move past our resistance and challenges much quicker than any other way. And they can connect with me at mentor@kamknight.com.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Cam. That's really kind of you to give those guides out. They sound really interesting. And if you've stuck around for this video and you've been listening with intent, then you'll know just how important those guides could be to take you to the further step. Because this episode was really just a starting step. It was an excellent starting step and a primer into what the problems are, why they're so difficult, and how you can start to tackle them. But of course, to take that next step, if you are someone who's serious about leveling up, if you are serious about staying a bit more in control, and if you've kind of had enough of being the victim of your distractions, the victim of not being able to get what you want done, and the victim of the regret that follows, then following on with these guys is what I think is going to take you to the next step, with understanding it better and fixing yourself around. Because really, you'll never know how much you can improve until you take those first steps, right? And you'll be surprised if you start doing it seriously, putting that self work into self improvement. Even in a month's time, even in 3 months' time, you could be a completely different person, and not going through kind of the emotional mood swings that comes with getting distracted and not staying focused
Yeah.
all the time.